There was a time where I explained it well, but that was not a time where all of this had happened. I'm now at day 3 awake. So whilst I'm still with my eyes wide fucking open, I am about to embark on a task to shut yours. The re-explanation, that was shocking. So yeah, okay, yeah. Literally 3 days no sleep, deal with it. It's going to be a ramble, but this is the way it is. Before pre-dawn of time, there was nothing defined as latent energy, chaos, or chaos, interchangeable. The interaction of latent energy with itself, or nothing with itself, or is on measure for measure compounded. Sorry if there are pauses, I'm actually multitasking with other individuals. Where the fuck was I? So, okay. Latent energy, nothing, chaos. Same thing. Leads to an explosion on measure for measure compounded, which is classified as the dawn of time. Measure for measure compounded is also known as God. There are universes, yes, all within the one universal framework based on measure for measure compounded. Nothing exists without it. There's a paradox within that statement. Measure for measure compounded, because of the source stem, or because of the initial first steps of the legacy. Nothing, chaos, latent energy, they all have their, I refer to them as 3 separate entities, they're one, but they all have their legacies. It all has its legacy. That legacy, based on measure for measure compounded, then needs to be transferred down the chain until it is accounted for. And the very mechanisms of measure for measure compounded will work that error, those legacies of nothing, out of the system. And they're actually defined as entities. Many things, but inclusive entities. And there are levels within this. Picture it as a branching tree. 2 endpoints in this game. One being eternity, where nothing is cancelled out. And one being infinity, where that is the bulk of how of how the error is dealt with within its own internalized system, which becomes an implosion. And I've spoken about this in 2018. Hey, has that account been deleted as well? Whatever the fuck. I wrote it down as well, so fuck you if it has. But it becomes an implosion. So, you can envision it as a black hole, whatever the fuck you want to see it as. I'm not going to go into the details. It's not important. It's not relevant, aside from you being aware that it is an implosion, an implosion of nothingness, which doesn't function in the same way as, for instance, a black hole would function, where relatively 99.99999% of nothing escapes, although that's being slightly thrown into question. And that could account then, interestingly, wow, that obviously then links in with me. Well, I'm serious about this. That links in, measure for measure compounded, whether you like it or not, is the fucking answer. It is very simple. Measure for measure compounded is God. I have answered your questions. All of them, since the dawn of time. Everything, for whatever your concept is, It all falls within this. You may not like the expression of it within this framework, within this calculation. Give a shit. It's accounted for. It's an amazing equation. It literally answers everything. But, that being said, as opposed to a black hole where relatively nothing escapes, and we could also make that argument, in fact, if we take the two endpoints being infinity or eternity. Because infinity will never invade upon eternity's territory. It's an impossibility. It has been eliminated. It to the point where it no longer exists even within the memory of those who exist in eternity. And that was the issue when we tie it back to, writing it as a sci-fi concept. The main protagonist in eternity being the purification of love, as any other protagonist. So, rather, the main protagonist in the sci-fi horror stems from eternity and is the embodiment of embodiment. I'm so fucked. Of measure for measure compounded. So that when there's a discussion, because this has not been finalized, right? This continues. When there's a discussion about how everything can be saved, eternity is a purification of love. That is the end goal. Then there becomes it's the polemic of, hang on, wait a minute, what are the base concepts of this equation? Why is it that not everything can be solved in a way that leads to a path of eternity for all? Oh, very simple. Because measure for measure compounded cannot allow for that. It's not within the equation. There was nothing. And again, to repeat, it needs to be calculated for and accounted for. But in going back to the black hole idea, nothing escapes from infinity. In comparison, also when placed against eternity. However, there are levels. Then this is the interesting thing. There is a hierarchy. The uppermost echelons of the hierarchies in infinity. It is, fuck you truly. But it's a slight shame. It's a slight shame, rather, because those in eternity will not know of the suffering of those in infinity. It's such a precious full circle, really. It is the inverse of what exists in the wasteland of universes, which is known as Earth. Earth is the refuse. Earth is where things go to be sorted. Earth is the glitch legacy train. Glitch! Oh, thanks for showing me that post so big, Vic. Marsh is only a glitch in the refuse section. Because Marsha belongs in eternity, as do others within the slime shit level, which is, of course, refuse of all the universes. Eternity needs to reach that completely. At the point where the sci-fi horror comes into play and there is a discussion of the protagonists within eternity, not proper, let's say, the gates of, to use your linguistic schema on Earth, on the refuse level. Their purification of love. They want to save everything. They want the ability for everything to go into eternity. And there needs to be a realization of why not? Why is that impossible? And the only way that can be understood is to be placed in the worst place in the universe, which, aside from infinity, which implodes upon itself, therefore ceases to exist. Again, it's quite simple, but there are layers to this. So, and again, this was spoken of in 2018. And the point where infinity is at its apex, so to speak, which is where it will remain forever, and which is where it currently is. I'll let you think about that. Infinity already exists, of course, but it doesn't exist it doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. It has imploded upon itself. There is an empty space of unimaginable chaos within a little pocket of the universes within that. There is one universe, and there are many within it. There is also infinity, which has ceased to exist. However, and going back to the black hole concept, everything from infinity exists at listen to me, it makes perfect sense. Everything from infinity exists at every level aside from eternity. Eternity is measure for measure, compounded, perfected. Negation of, and not just simply by negation, but by equal and opposite effects on energy. It takes care of itself, so that the tissue which you use to blow the toilet paper which you use to wipe your ass, every atom, everything contained within that is a representation of one individual whose everything which makes them up is within every atom of that tissue, so that when that tissue is wiped against your ass and breaks apart as it's getting flushed down the toilet and as it's been ripped from the roll, that all exists on that one individual within infinity, or all of them, each being separate as one. It's beautiful. It is so fucking beautiful. It is affected upon the individual at once. But I have given you only one example of 10 squares of toilet paper. But each atom within each square is the individual, which is nothing. And they will feel compounded at once the sum total of that agony of being ripped apart millions of times. Because it doesn't just happen once, right? That toilet paper needs to completely disintegrate. Again, I have only given you one example. Everything which occurs, everything with atoms, it is all nothing. It is all the effect on infinity, and those within infinity are infinity. So even though it has been disappeared, it still exists everywhere aside from in eternity. You walk against it, and we're only talking the level of slime shit, for Christ's sakes. You walk into a door, that is the same. Every inch, every rip, everything is felt all at once on everything which is nothing within infinity. And it has to be within infinity, because that is the end point for the era. The effects of the error are compounded, of course, and they exist from nothing, from before the dawn of time, of course. So that you don't just, if you are set for the path of infinity, you don't simply have the effects of your, inverted commas, theorized conscious existence on the level of, for instance, refuse. The refuse level. The slime shit level. Okay, in the slime shit level, there's this idea of humans who have a chronological fixed time span within that physical capacity on Earth. Nothing before it, nothing after it. That is not the way it works. Everything since before the dawn of time is affected upon you. Your actions continue to have effects, of course, subsequent to your demise on this level of nothingness, of refuse. I call it nothing because refuse is nothing. But again, obviously, within the schema of measure for measure compounded, everything aside from when you're at the point of eternity or infinity has elements of nothing, right? And when you're at, because that's where the siphoning off occurs. That's where you get the pure expression of all aspects of measure for measure compounded. Filtered in the correct categories in which they belong. The only aim of measure for measure compounded is to be expressed in the truest, purest form of itself. So they're the utmost hierarchy levels when we're talking about hierarchies, and the paradox here again is that at eternity, being the upper echelon of perfection of that level of measure for measure compounded, there is no hierarchy, of course. It should be self-explanatory. Infinity ceases to exist. The legacy, the memory, all of that shit, they don't exist. They cannot. They have been wiped out. You know, people speak of concepts of an afterlife, and do we remember? Not in eternity. Nothing is remembered of infinity, of anything which makes up infinity. Cannot be. It has been wiped clean. Inverse, of course, on infinity. And again, on your legacy continues beyond your death in the slime shit universe. If you're at infinity, you are in that excruciating, and it will, so I keep cutting my sentences off, but hopefully you're following here. I cannot understate enough, or I cannot overstate enough, rather. I cannot overstate. Wow, I am so tired. I cannot overstate how everything is felt upon you at once, on measure for measure compounded to infinity. It's fucking beautiful. That's a summary.